In the last video, we looked at our just kind of basic model of kind of the effect of world trade, right? Free trade on a domestic market, right? In this video, we are going to look at kind of a response that might come from that, right? Which is protectionism, right? So protectionism, what protectionism is, it's restraining trade through policy that burdens foreign producers but not domestic producers. All right, so with protectionism, what is happening is you kind of through kind of different laws and policies, we're trying to protect domestic producers from competition, right? That's what protectionism is. Protectionism is, right, trying to give domestic producers a leg up on foreign producers, right, by kind of increasing the costs to those foreign producers, right? So again, well, we'll get to that in a second, all right? or just limiting them in somehow, all right? That's what protectionism is. There are two types that we're going to talk about. One we're actually going to talk about quite a bit. The other one we're just going to mention. All right, the first one is the one that we're going to eventually talk about quite a lot, and that is tariffs, or a tariff. Tariffs are pretty simple. They're just taxes on imports. All right, so it's definitely a very common way to enact protectionist policies. We know that a tax is taxes increase the cost of production. If you increase the cost of production, that's going to decrease supply, right? And so that's what they're trying to do here with these tariffs, so that there's less supply from foreign producers, so that domestic producers can fill that gap. Right. The other one that we're just going to mention briefly, we're not going to talk about it too more after we just mention it here, right? But a quota, all right, this is a restriction on the number of imports. All right, so saying, hey, you're trying to bring this good into the country, well, you can only bring in so many units, right? There's a limit on how much you can bring in. All right, so quotas are also very common. We're going to look specifically at tariffs. All right, we're going to put up our model, our graph of kind of what we did in the last video with our world supply and all of that, and it's going to get pretty complicated. In that there's going to be a lot of stuff going on, and this whiteboard is not that large. So I'm going to try to make it as clear as possible, but we might have like a little wrap-up thing after we get the graph off to write some stuff down to make sure we've got it. All right. So I'm going to throw in supply, domestic, demand, domestic. All right, then, I guess we should mark our, so just like last time, we're going to mark the no trade equilibrium. Actually, do we really need to do that? Yeah, that's fine. We might erase those later if we need to. All right, then we're going to throw in our world supply. And I'm going to try to make this as... All right, so this is where we're going to start from. This is where we left last time. So this is our free trade quantity supplied. This is our free trade quantity demanded. All right, so with what we looked at in the last video, right? We kind of looked at the fact that our producer surplus really dropped, right? It was this entire triangle, right? Now it's this very, very tiny triangle, right? And if you're a producer, you probably wouldn't like that very much, right? And so you might, get together with some other producers of the same good, right? You might go up to Washington and say, "Wah, this isn't fair. Put tariffs on their goods," right? And they might do that, right? And so we would get a new supply curve, right? So this blue one is going to be, or is supposed to be, world plus tariff. All right, so this is the world supply, right, plus the tariff. So I'm just going to put PWT for the price, and then we can mark, so world plus tariff, that's kind of that WT, all right? That changes our changes a lot of stuff, right? So moves our equilibrium, right? So now our equilibrium is at the world price plus the tax, right? Follow that over to the demand curve, and it goes down to our domestic demand, right? Or quantity demanded with the tariff, right? With the world plus tariff. Right, and so we see that now, with this tariff, right, domestic consumers are paying a higher price for this good. They also have less of it available, right? We can also see that the surpluses have changed, right? So where before our consumer surplus with free trade, right, went all the way down to where our world supply intersected the demand curve, right, and then all the way over and then back up. Now it only comes down to our new world supply plus the tariff, right, because that is our new price. So that's a smaller, right, a considerably smaller amount of consumer surplus, right, and we can see that producer surplus did increase a little bit, right. So before it was just this little triangle, right, above the supply curve, below that, or above the black supply curve and above the red, and below the red supply curve. Right now it's the area above the black supply curve and below the blue one, right? So domestic supply, above domestic supply, below supply, world supply plus the tariff. All right, so also the number of inputs, or excuse me, not inputs, imports has decreased, right? Because now the gap between the kind of domestic demand and domestic, or domestic consumption and domestic production is smaller, right? The difference between the quantity supplied domestically and the quantity demanded, right? So we are importing less, right? But we also saw a decrease in total surplus. All right, a couple of other quick things. One, kind of going from free trade to a tariff. We have a deadweight loss. It's this area right here, right? That once was a part of consumer surplus and is no longer there, right? We also have this rectangle that's kind of a part of that, right? And this is kind of revenue from the tax. All right, so this is the difference between our quantity demanded and our quantity supplied, right? That's the units that are being taxed, right? Those are the imports, right? A tariff is just a tax on imports. So those are the only ones being taxed, right? And the amount of the tax, right, would be the difference between the price with the tariff and the price without the tariff, right? And so we could find that tax revenue right there. All right, I think that is, I think that's just about it with this. Let's see, how quickly could we go through that? Not enough. All right, so we'll go ahead and end this video here. All right, so again, when we introduce that tariff, right, we are going to kind of just essentially just take the price, add the tariff. That's where we get this new world price with the tariff, right? The supply curve is still just a straight flat line, right? We get a new quantity supplied domestically with the tariff, and we get a new quantity demanded, right? We have fewer imports. We're not importing as much, right? But we also have a loss in total surplus, all right? So producers got a small boost, right? We'll get a small boost to producer surplus. Consumers see usually a much larger decrease in consumer surplus. All right, but that is our kind of protectionism, all right? Just a basic model of what happens when we introduce a tariff. All right, in the next video, we're going to talk a little bit more about protectionism and talk about some of the costs of protectionism. I don't know, I was about to erase that. I can just do that later. All right, I'll see you guys in the next video. Yeah.